getting back into the swing of things?
Ready. We are ready when you're
Already. Okay. Yeah, over to you.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Resource and Estates Committee being held today, Tuesday the 10th of February 2026. As you are aware, the public element of today's meeting is being live streamed and those participating have given consent to their inclusion. The recording will be available following the meeting on the City Corporation's YouTube channel and will be available for up to 1 civic year. Chair.
Well, welcome everybody. I think we are core, and I know that I can see that Ben, Murphy and Madush are also online. I just wanted to remind people that this morning it's unfortunate that not so many people are here because we've got a really important discussion to have on the police finances. Not least because there's a timing problem in the sense that normally these papers would be discussed at PAB, but the timing doesn't allow for that to happen, and they must get to the finance committee. So we need to try and be as robust in our discussions as we can be, so that the chair and deputy chair of PAB are able to take chairman's action on the basis of our conversation, so that these get signed off appropriately. So that is, well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of us in the room and 2 on screen. So hopefully we are certainly quorate, but means that we've those of us that are around just need to give it as much thought and comment as possible. The second thing I wanted to say is, of course, we are looking at these in the context of police reform, the white paper, and we don't know what the conclusion of that will be. So I think that in considering these papers today, we just simply have to put the conversation in the context of what we want to see as the best possible outcome for City of London Police, and keep that uppermost in our minds. And the final thing I wanted to say was a welcome to Randall. Good to see you back, Randall. And I know that you will, in your usual way, have given some scrutiny to the papers. So look forward to your comments. So good to see you again. Okay, Town Clerk.
Item 1, we have apologies. Apologies were received from Jason Groves, James Thompson, Tice Brooke, Dawn Wright, Alderman Liz King and Deborah Oliver.
Okay, shall we move on to minutes?
Item 2 is members' declarations. I have none.
No, I'm not aware of any.
Item 3 are minutes to agree the public minutes and non-public summary of the meeting held on the 12th of November 2025. These are for decision on page 5.
Okay, members who were present last time, any comments or corrections? No, okay, we happy to approve. Yep, thank you very much.
Item 4 is the Q3 workforce monitoring report for information on page 11.
Kelly.
Hello, Chair. Obviously it's there for you all to see, and I am not going to introduce any items, just to highlight the that we are still amber for our vacancies against police staff, which I can answer any questions in relation to that, but the numbers are slowly increasing, and we are red against our occupational health SLA, with work being done to understand and move priorities with that, working with the corporation as it's a shared service. And sickness also being amber, but in line with, unfortunately, national numbers when it comes to policing and public sector. So I open up for any questions, comments or observations, and we'll go through that rather than go through it line by line.
Thanks, Kelly. Members, anything to ask or comment about on these? Okay, well, I'll start off, because I think, Kelly, as we said before, I mean, each time we see these papers, they do get better. And we asked last time for the link to the policing plan to be made clear. So thank you very much. You did that in the summary page, and it's very helpful to see. So I think we are moving ourselves to a place where we can read across, at least from workforce and planning, police plan, and that's very helpful. Thank you. Jackie.
Yeah, I was just interested in the retention and exiting working group. I just wondered, out of interest, if it was possible for the committee to see an example of the survey and the kinds of questions that are asked in terms of exit. Just Pure nosiness. Thank you.
So the exiting and retention working group have two arms, should we say. One where we are trying to retain people. So we've introduced a stay pathway. And this year, so this calendar year, we've not had many people refer themselves. They can refer themselves anonymously to have a conversation with a coach. In cases we've got data where that has worked and people have remained, and in others, they've decided to still move on. In regards to exiting, happy to share the data, as in the questions that are asked. This is what we encourage everybody to do when they exit the organisation. And with that data, unfortunately, the samples are quite small because we can't mandate exit surveys. But with the data, we do see some themes, and that's presented at our strategic people board on a quarterly basis. In regards to some of the questions, why are you leaving, and understanding that from a perspective of, is it transferring, is it promotion, is it other opportunities? And then there'll be some questions or some comments that we get that require further interrogation or investigation by my HR business partnership team, because there's things that have come up that we need to understand from a cultural perspective. What do we need to change to maybe prevent that happening in future? But happy to take it as an action to show you what we currently ask our leavers in regards to why they're exiting the organisation.
Kelly, could I just ask a couple of questions, please? And the first one is that the police staff numbers have gone down a little bit. I know it's not a lot, but it's still down. So I mean, I think that the two things in my mind is, first of all, if we're unable to fill these posts, the 10% on a long-term basis, then is there a, do we really need these posts to be filled, and what's the impact on the organisation on them remaining vacant? And the second thing is that if we do think we need them, what more do we need to do to get to 90% and move that number up? Is the first area of question. And the second is in the summary, we talk about sickness, and I mean, I think it doesn't seem to be a bad place to be, except that there's a significant amount of sickness loss for long-term cases. And the obvious question, I think, is what we do to support the people who are off sick long-term, and how we can help bring them back into work. So perhaps you could give us a comment on that as well.
Start with the first in regards to vacancies. So we have a lot of recruitment activity. Hopefully it was detailed in the pack, but if not, we obviously have a lot of temporary establishment roles which come from our National League force, where we have new initiatives. For example, the Domestic Corruption Unit has brought in a number of new roles, staff and officers, and they're not permanently on our establishment. So we do recruit internally and externally for all our roles, but some of our internal applicants, some of our internal members like to see those as opportunities, development, and move around into those roles, and therefore reduce our permanent establishment headcount and increase the vacancies there, which we then have to go out and recruit for. We are very attractive. So in the month of January, we had 2 recruitment campaigns, one within the HR remit and one within our secretariat support, of which both roles that were, mid-level roles attracted over 50 people. So it's not that we're not attracting the people, it seems that we are attracting a number of internal people to go for those roles, and we're moving our internal people around. What we are doing is bringing that issue to our tactical people board that looks at tactical solutions. So one of the areas that we have issues in is in regards to our analysts and researchers, where they are seeing an advert for a role that they think is very attractive and very different in regards to development, and internal people are applying for that. So we're just moving the chess pieces rather than recruiting to the vacancies. So we're looking at different ways, as in having generic recruitment adverts for our analysts and researchers, and having a yearly posting panel where we can move people for development purposes to try and stem the flow of the constant internal movement. And that was one of the things that was discussed at Tactical People Board in January. So that is what we're doing. What we're also doing in regards to vacancies on a yearly basis with our colleagues in finance is we're reviewing the establishment. We're working with the directorates to understand why some of our roles are long-term vacancies. Are they required? Can they be effectively no longer required and given to another area as part of the business planning process to help areas that have got more demand within them, such as vetting, etc., which came out of the recent business planning process. We're also reviewing posts where we have them on hold. So we do have some posts within our establishment that are on hold to pay for some of the temporary roles where we see that we have got an increase in demand and we do need to service that demand. And we're constantly reviewing to understand if we have that role on hold, do we actually need it in the long term? And if not, can we use it to pay for that provision? And that's done on a yearly cycle with finance to meet with the finance cycle. And we do that we review it in September in preparation for the budget build of the following year. So that's what we are doing. In relation to your questions regarding sickness, yeah, we're not in a bad place, but we have got something called Alarm, which is a local absence meeting, sickness absence meeting, which is with the directorate heads, their senior SLT and HR business partner to look at long-term cases and what are we doing to support those long-term cases and managers to manage them. In some cases, there will be where we need to do a number of things to bring people back into the organisation. And in other cases, there's the approach of what do we need to do, either sickness and absence management process for staff or the new revised UPP for unsatisfactory attendance for officers, which has just come into the forefront in policing and is a revision to the previous regulations. So we are supporting managers. We are seeing an increase of managers undertaking those processes and trying to reinforce to those officers and staff that are off sick. Stage one of both those processes are a supportive measure. And for us to understand what we need to do as an organisation to support you back into the workplace. What reasonable adjustments do we need to do? Do we need to refer you to occupational health? Do we need to look at other alternatives for you? So there is a lot of work going on in that space at the moment. And my business partnership team have done a number of digital inputs which people could have logged on via a webinar, but it's also recorded for managers to understand what their role is in bringing people back and supporting their staff. So there is a lot of work going on in that arena.
Okay, thank you. Beth.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. I see that high up on the list of sickness stats is mental health. Which I guess is not surprising in if you're working for the police. But I just wonder what you're doing early on in the process to kind of spot people who may be starting to suffer with their mental health and giving them help early on in the process rather than waiting for them to feel so ill that they cannot work and are therefore signed off work. I just wondered what support's in place for that. And as a secondary question, it's about recruitment, because you were saying that the City of London Police is a very attractive place to work and lots of people like to move within the force and take the roles that are available there. So it seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect there between that and attracting people from outside the force to take the roles that are available. I just wondered if you had any views on why that might be happening. Thank you.
I'll start with your last question first, if I may. So we are attracting external applicants from outside the force. It just so happens when it comes to panel selection and interviews that take place, that all have an independent person on that panel, just to relay our internals seem to perform better. So, and that could be a benefit in regards to the fact they understand the organisation, how it works. They have a sense of how it works, but we are trying to delve into what that is. Is it what can we do to support external colleagues or external people, particularly in the staff element of joining policing? Because I've only ever been in policing, so I think I'd find if I went to a different sector, I might find that quite difficult also. So how do we support those individuals? In regards to mental health, there are a number of practices that we work alongside occupational health with. So we're nationally, there are a number of areas. We have the TRIM process, if there is a event that's taken place that officers and operational staff may be impacted by, that is put in straight away. I'm not going to delve into what that is, because I would be telling you a load of things that I probably need the expert here, but happy to send over the information. Also going to our strategic people board next week is we currently, through the Home Office fund, a number of roles to be people to be assessed in regards to psychological safety when it comes to doing a number of key critical roles across the force. So that'd be firearm, that'd be child protection, etc., call handlers, response. The Home Office are removing that. So we are looking to see what we can do, and a paper is going to strategic people board to understand what we can do for our force to continue that continue that practice to support our staff and officers, so we can try and get in there first. We very much encourage the use of we pay for counselling. So we have a counselling service that we pay for on top of our occupational health provision. And we very much encourage our officers and staff to use that where they can. And I'm a big advocate of that, because it is a very good service. Sometimes we don't know what the trigger is, but we try to get in there. So there is a number of things going on. And when it comes to the mental health aspect, there will be some that we may have got there first to try and support, but inevitably they have taken time off, and others that we have no idea coming. But when we go through the local absence management process, we're looking to understand their trends, are there areas of trends where this is happening more than there is in others, and to understand what mitigation we need to put in place. We've also introduced a new tactical wellbeing board, which takes the framework from the blue light Oscar Kilo and looking to see how we can improve there. It's in its infancy. The first one only sat in January. There's a lot of good work going on around the force, but we don't measure it very well, so we don't know how it's working. So that's an AFI from the HMIC FRS, and we're using this tactical board to manage how we do things and share best practice. I hope that's answered your questions. I hope.
Very, very good answer. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Right. Thanks very much. I'm going to move us on. Thank you, Kelly. I mean, from just the way in which you're talking about workforce, there's clearly a sea change in the way in which we approach this now. So I think it's very positive to see. Thank you. Okay. Shall we move on to next item, then item 5, Kezia?
Item 5, the 2025-26 Q3 revenue and project programme budget monitoring, for information on page 45.
Great, thank you. I think, Mark, you're going to talk to this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Q3 25-26 outturn is on pages 45 to 80 in your pack. A couple of high-level things just to note. It remains a break-even position at £122.4 million net expenditure for the year. While the report fraud and action fraud exceptional extension costs pressures have lessened since Q2, there are other sort of non-paid pressures which have been offset by core pay underspends and by some additional income. The main variances are shown on page 58 in your pack. There's a waterfall chart in there. Within those main pressures, those assessed as being sustained into 26-27 have been mitigated within the 26-27 budget, which we will address later on today through a combination of tactically applying a 3% inflationary uplift to budgets and some targeted increases. Some other things I think worthwhile just reflecting on very briefly. In 25-26, there was a police officer headcount target of 996 officers, which will be removed from the 1st of April as part of the 26-27 funding package. Achieving the headcount target of 996 secures £2.6 million worth of funding. We secured it at the midpoint in the year. The next checkpoint is on the 31st of March, and we are on track to deliver the numbers against that headcount target, which is shown on page 59 of your pack. Overtime is assessed to be within budget this year, and in delivering a balanced budget, we are £4.4 million worth of mitigations will be delivered, and 2.2 of those sustained into 26-27. Later on in your pack, on pages 66 to 69, we set out the hotspot initiatives for this year and the funding associated with that. Members might recall that the Home Office had allocated £1 million to each force to deliver some specific activities in antisocial behaviour hotspots. We're on track to utilise that funding in the year, and a minimum of 9,000 visible policing hours will be delivered for that. Again, that funding will cease in 26-27, but we'll pick that up as part of the budget report. This pack also includes the outturn against the Police Authority Board budget, which is shown on pages. Just dial back. It's shown on page 66 of the pack. That is within £1 million funding envelope provided by BRP, and the outturn is expected to be within that at £936,000. We also have a project capital programme section of the report. This shows the whole life costing for projects, which is on page 78 and 79. For this financial year, we are showing a net overspend of 3.3 million against the capital programme, but we need to put that in the context of the majority of that relates to the report fraud project, for which it's a 2/3, 1/3 funding split between ourselves and the Home Office. So £2.4 million of the £5 million overspend there will be met from that. The rest will be met from within COLPS, local resources, and there are also £2 million worth of project underspends in the year, which is due to rephasing of projects due to resources being allocated towards a report fraud programme, plus some national programmes also being rephased into future years. I appreciate there's a lot of information in this pack.
There is. Yeah, I mean, let's try and break it down. And can we take questions on the revenue first of all, and then we'll come on to the capital, if that's okay. Randall.
The National Lead Force seems to be down to recruitment/onboarding problems. Is that vetting, or is that deeper than that?
So some of the underspends against the funding activities are due to sort of time lags in recruitment. I think that's to do with we'd need to get an operational side view on this as well. But from what I've seen, a lot of this is around our budgeting, assuming that people would onboard faster than they have. Some of that is maintaining within our headcount targets as well, and also that there can be other ancillary delays through vetting. But in the main, I believe the vetting kind of delays have reduced substantially over the last year.
I think maybe to add to that, Randall, is this what we are seeing, and I think we're seeing it in National Lead Force as much as anywhere, is a lot of recruitment activity, but a high propensity towards internal appointments, which don't actually increase the overall strength. It shuffles people around, but doesn't necessarily increase the strength. And then when you combine that with attrition, natural levels of attrition, it sort of, despite the level of recruitment activity it's undertaken, it's not really coming through as much as it should be in terms of seeing the chart rise, basically. And of course, with the national work, whilst we've got healthy numbers compared to our overall resourcing size in COLP, it's sort of, we're probably not quite, in some areas, we're not quite where the grant agreements provided for in terms of resourcing levels, so we don't draw down the income. We underspend effectively, and therefore we lose out on the income to some degree there as well. It's something we're mindful of. And sorry, one other key point here, and it's going to really play out into 26-27, which I'll come on to on the budget paper, is that we often get very late communication of grant agreements, which automatically puts you on a back foot at the start of the financial year for recruitment. And quite often, actually, what we're seeing now is signs of the regional organised crime units. We channel funding, some of our national funding we channel through to the regional organised crime units. We're starting to see them allow fixed term contracts to lapse because of lack of confirmation of future year funding. So it is what we are, I think we're almost guaranteeing an underspend next year because of the late communication of funding that we're getting from Home Office on both cyber and fraud, actually.
Sorry, if you're speaking, you've not got your mic on.
Sorry, thanks, Madhush. Thank you very much. I was just asking a question about the risk between quarter 3 and quarter 4, and being in a place where we can still end the year in a good position. So, I mean, it's really difficult, I think, when you've got so much of the expenditure on people to manage that risk. Do you have any idea of how we can assess that, or how concerned we might be, or is it just keep doing more of the same?
Thanks, Chair. So whilst we report to this committee on a quarterly basis, we are undertaking very regular monitoring of the outturn position. So at a minimum monthly, we'll be looking at that with budget leads, and we are closely tracking the outturn. We're looking at people outcomes. We are reforecasting as we go through the year, so that by the time that we get to outturn, we have a fairly confident position. This paper was produced at the end of December. We're now in the beginning of February. Having gone through our monthly monitoring and reporting into our strategic finance board, we're still holding that break-even forecast.
Okay.
So the confidence levels will obviously increase as the year progresses. And at this stage, we're assessing that we will still be within that budget envelope.
Great, thank you. The second question I had was around mitigation. So we've talked about mitigation a lot in this committee, and I think in PAB as well. And I'm always worried when I see that some of the move to balanced budget has been fortuitous saving, and that is always a concern, because that doesn't necessarily follow through into future years. I think you did say that there is one of the mitigations that will roll over into move into 26, 27, but that still concerns me. That, and I know we're looking at quarter 3 here, but given the pressures that might be coming, can you say any more about how we can make those mitigating actions more permanent than just relying on fortuitous savings or reserves?
Thank you, Chair. The main sort of unforeseen mitigation in the year has been the unplanned vacancies that have affected the core budget. For future budgets, we budget to our full establishment, so that we are not budgeting for vacancies and building that into the budget. Save for a natural vacancy allowance, so we assume around 2.5% of a natural vacancy allowance to allow for movers, new joiners, and the gaps in between. So we are not so that mitigation, albeit unplanned, we are not baking that into next year's and building in the risk along that. The other key mitigation is around national funding, and that's one of the ones that will roll over into the next financial year and beyond, and that builds on a sort of full cost recovery and income generation model, which we've implemented to help sustain COGS finances. But again, that does build in with it risk. So particularly in the current white paper and police reform sort of proposals, there is inherent risk in sustaining those mitigations. But for some of the non-paid professional fees ones where we've targeted budgets, we have stripped those out. So those will be baked in for future years.
Yeah, if I so, and absolutely right. And if I may add to that, what we've tried to do in the budget, which we'll come on to, is to anticipate the pressures that we're seeing this year, we're sort of providing for next year. And as Mark rightly says, we are providing for almost the totality of full establishment. But pressures have particularly in policing, seemingly pressures have a habit of coming in from left field, new pressures. So it is going to require dynamic management as we go forward. One opportunity, and this is going to have to be managed really carefully, but one opportunity now is that with the removal of the officer uplift target, we have got a bit more flexibility in how we resource to our officer numbers. Now, of course, we need to make sure we're achieving the right operational outcomes, but it gives us a bit more flexibility, for example, in how we build our future sort of workforce mix and balance. So that will help. But yes, I think a medium-term budget risk is that we do start to have more success in recruiting towards full establishment, and then other pressures are going to come in from left field. And of course, one of the big pressures, of course, is inflation and pay award, the size of pay awards. And if those are not funded, then that becomes a big issue for us.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I have to say I remain quite concerned about this, because I can see, there was an increase in the core grant. There were local business rates that helped manage this year. We think we know where we're going on the business rate premium. That would be helpful. Changes in core grant and other unexpected bungs, if you like, just may or may not happen. But it still seems to me as though there's a substantial target, and I'm not yet convinced that we've got sufficient not clarity about the mitigations, but security about the mitigating actions that will help us deliver that. Because I don't think we can keep going back. We can't go to reserves to keep, balancing the books. We have to take the appropriate action. And it kind of links to the workforce question about, of those vacant 10% posts or 11 plus posts, how many do we really need? And, do we have to be much more active in looking for savings as opposed to relying on things? It's quite substantial fortuitous savings.
Agree, Chair. And I think two key things here. One is, and I'll come on to this with the budget paper, the level of risk is growing into the medium term. I think the level of we are starting from a good place compared to other forces, but the level of risk is growing into the medium term, undoubtedly financially. Mm-hmm. Second key point is we do need to do more on scenario planning, I think, as a force. I do think the reform agenda is going to force that issue and help with that issue, actually. And that's something we need to grip very quickly now in terms of how we respond to the police reform and white paper process.
I absolutely agree with that. I suppose I'm wondering, well, I guess not to get into the reform conversation now, because it's quite extensive, but there are clearly some workforce financial issues around scenario planning and that need to play into that. And perhaps it's a place for PAB to have the conversation about how and that work is going to come together and how it feeds into REC and the local police committee. Because I think, as we've said, we're looking constantly now to try and join the dots and be able to read across. And it's not a big hole, but it's a big area of work that needs a substantial focus on. Thank you. Can we move on to capital then, please? Any questions on the capital numbers monitoring? No, I mean, I think I think we can clearly see where there are areas of variance, and we understand the position from report fraud. We've talked about that in the past. There are other variances where there's been some underspends. I think largely the paper sets those out. And I remember when first joining PAB being very unclear about the oversight of the project of capital projects. That has come a long way as well, I think, over recent years. I guess I just wonder if there's any comment, officers, you'd like to make on the underspend on any of the capital projects. I mean, clearly things like, firearms, etc. There's building the partnerships and working out the detail has clearly been a factor in some of these things. But is there anything else you want to highlight?
Sue online.
Sue, hi. Anything you want to add?
Good morning, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. So my position of Director of Change means that I have full oversight of all of the capital projects that are underway currently. And as Mark alluded to previously, some of that is national projects that have slipped, and that's not in our gift to influence, just to understand the impact. And we go a long way to forecasting what that future picture may look like in terms of financial impact. And when it lands, aligned to other projects that are in the mix at that time. Case in point, for instance, is the ESN, the Emergency Services Network, which is now forecast for 28-29, but they're moving very fast. They slowed down last year. This year, next year, I've had to move funding into that pot to ensure that we can move as quickly as they need to. Same with things like firearms, which have more local implications for us. Some of our projects, our capital projects, have been delayed because we've resourced things like reform fraud as part of our reprioritisation, but others has been a case of resource capacity and funding compared to some of those other pressures coming on board. So it's really being a bit dynamic and agile in how we're managing all of those projects, taking a pragmatic approach to their delivery and scheduling them against every other project, some of which is in our gift, some of which isn't, to determine.
Okay, thanks very much. So any follow-up questions? No, okay, then this information is for, this paper is for information. So without any other comments, we'll move on to next item.
Item 6, the Revenue Budget and Project Fund for 2026-27. This is for decision on page 81.
Okay, thank you very much. I just to remind members that that some of the detail is in a non-public appendix. So at this point in the meeting, we'll talk about the only the public part of the agenda item, and then reserve any significant detail questions for non-public, which we'll be moving into almost straight away. So any questions, first of all, on the public paper?
Chair, if I may,
Sure.
would you allow me just to say?
Yes, of course. Sorry, Ali, of course.
That's okay, not at all. And some of this will repeat a little bit of what we just talked about under the last item, but I guess the first key point is that the budget is being built to fund continuing resourcing levels to enable delivery of our policing plan priorities, and that is not a common position in policing. Most forces are having to take down resourcing, reduce resourcing levels. So this budget is based on sustaining resourcing levels with one or two areas of small increase, like the neighbourhood policing guarantee. Plus, as we're aware from the workforce paper, the opportunity to increment closer to establishment levels, particularly for police staff. We start from a good place financially. The fact we've been able to balance the budget for 26-27 based on continued resourcing levels is positive, certainly compared to other forces who are, as I say, having to reduce resourcing levels. They've had to swap, put officers into staff roles, sort of as a de-civilianisation type of process. They've had to raid reserves. They've had to take out progressively higher loans for capital investment. So we are in a better place as a result, I think, of having got the BRP and local funding position sorted out the last few years as a result of our core funding increases, and also the work we've done on our national lead force funding to get that onto a much stronger full cost recovery footing in the last few years. That's helped us to get to a much stronger place. But there are a growing range of downstream risks. The medium-term financial plan that we submitted to REP in November and then PAB in December which showed cost pressures rising to 25 million by 2029-30. We know that the spending review settlement for policing has been front loaded. We've only been given a 1-year allocation, but we know that's front loaded so that the next 2 years of funding is going to be not at the same level of increase as 26-27. We know that the neighbourhood guarantee increase, which for Colt was 13 extra neighbourhood policing officers, is not fully funded, so we have had to use some of the benefit of that front loading to fully fund our neighbourhood police officers. We've had the benefit of a £4 million saving for our exceptional action fraud extension costs, which is a bit of a windfall opportunity because we have been throughout the implementation programme, we've had to keep the existing service running and at a progressively higher cost as well. So there is a big saving that we're benefiting from in 26-27 onwards. we're making 3 million of other mitigations. That is including a further growth in full cost recovery, overhead recovery for some of our national grants. And the final point is that we are expecting some higher costs for Ambition 25 implementation, but with the confirmation from Chamberlain's is that will be funded. Those higher costs will be funded. The biggest risk we have, as I mentioned earlier, is for our National Lead Force funding. And while it's potentially not a risk to the quantum, there is some risk, but it's not a high risk to the quantum. I think the risk is the timing of the communication when we're going to get the funding. Cyber, it's unlikely we're going to get formal confirmation until back end of March. I think we're being invited to put bids in at early March. I think it will be back end of March before we get more information. Fraud might be sooner than that. So that's our biggest risk area, and of course there is a dependency on that for some of our core resourcing levels as well, which are funded from overheads. As you will know from previous discussions, there is going to be a requirement on improving productivity so that we can sustain increasing demand levels within a like-for-like resourcing base. And as the MTFP develops, we are going to have to increase our levels of cashable efficiency savings as well. It's not just more for the same, it's going to have to be more for less as we progress as well. And then on capital, pages 100, 101 set out the capital programme that we're proposing to fund in 26-27. That includes allocations to cyclical replacement and continuous improvement initiatives. That's 5.4 million that has been allocated out of our revenue funding to fund the project portfolio. Sorry, that's a lot of information I've just thrown at you, but I thought those were all quite important points to make.
Yeah, and thank you very much. Okay, questions, challenges. Randall, good.
Thank you. Neighborhood policing. I think I heard you say that we're basically funding that out of the front loading. So then what happens in the next year when we have reduced resource?
So we're getting a degree of funding, but it's nowhere near enough to fund the costs even of an extra 13 officers. Other forces in 26, I think almost all other forces in 26-27 can't afford that increase without reprioritizing from other areas. They're now in a position where they can reprioritize because the uplift maintenance target has been reduced, so they can reallocate from other areas of policing into neighbourhood policing. But a lot of chiefs are saying that that means that we're allocating from more needy areas into what potentially they see as a less needy area. I think the likelihood is we are going to have to consider similar things from 27-28 onwards. We're probably the only force that is able to fully fund in 26-27 without needing to reduce resources elsewhere.
Ali, can I just follow up on that final point? I mean, we are going to, as you said, we're likely to need to see some fairly significant changes for 27-28. Presumably, we're already thinking about what those might be, and you know, getting the plans ready to move that way. I mean, this is part of the theme of seeing recurring changes. Is that a safe assumption?
Yeah. That's a really important question, Helen. I think where the immediate focus is going to be in responding to the police reform agenda, which I think has to tease out those answers.
Yeah.
So in the coming months, I mean, if we've got a 6-month independent review timescale to justify that will preside on what the future force structures will look like. that is where we are going to have to be able to answer those questions. Timescale. I'm afraid I haven't got any of more of my colleagues with me who can add to that one, but I think you're absolutely right that this needs a discussion at the pad in non-public, possibly even confidential, actually.
Yeah, I think that's right, because I was going to ask a question when we get to the productivity plan later, but I can probably ask it now, which is, we talked last meeting about whether there was a cultural understanding of productivity planning and what that means across the force. Now, it seems to me as though the productivity and these finance papers, that relationship is so critical. So do we think we're moving into a place where across the force and staff and senior officers really understand that relationship and are thinking in that way now?
If I may, Helen, do you think we could pick that up as part of the productivity paper?
Sure.
It's a really, I think that's where we'll have Alex and Paul as well.
Yeah.
For that
Okay.
item and in non-public. So
Yeah. No, that's absolutely
is that
fine.
okay? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I was also interested in your comment that Chamberlain has given assurance on Ambition 25. Yeah. Sorry for the sort of the little laugh, but how confident are you about that assurance, given what we know about the overall city position now?
So I know we've had a tricky discussion here that
we can move it to non-public as well if you want.
Police authority chairman does not want BRP being increased to cover these costs. I mean, BRP is going to be increased for other purposes, I think, but not to cover these. And actually most of the other purposes will be outside of the police budget. They may link to police accommodation and other issues, but they'll be outside of the police direct budget. The expectation from the Chamberlain is that the existing levels of BRP will support an allocation for these costs. So it would be done within current levels of business rate premium that have been increased in previous years.
Maybe
it might be. I mean, recognise the budget needs to be approved today, and we need to have a basis to sort of to move forward into the new year. But it might also be appropriate to be asking the Chamberlain that question at Police Authority Board as well, recognising that is after the budget's been approved.
Yeah, I suppose what's in my mind is that we've not underspent on allocations from BRP to date. So, as I understand it,
this is where allocations, this is where intake and allocations are, so we've had healthy levels of intake the last few years, and so far the allocations into the police budget have not used up all of that intake. Okay. So that's but what Chamberlains have done in previous years is given us an account. It's tended to be around the May Resource and Estates Committee have given us an account of how of BRP intake and how that's been allocated to different functions. Basically, I think we need to see that again probably at the next rep meeting.
Yeah. Okay. And I know we're being asked to make a decision on this in public, but we've also got the detail in non-public. So
well, should the decision be to subject to any?
I think that's absolutely right. That's just what I was going to check with Kezia, because I think the final decision has to be non-public. So this is subject to members' content with that. Yeah. Sorry.
Chair.
Yeah, Ben, sorry.
If I may, I was just going to say, I think we need to be really clear in our approval what the assumptions are.
I agree, but I think, Ben, could we have more of that discussion in non-public when we've got Alex and Paul here, if that's okay, because there's a bit of the story that's not quite available to us in public and only in non-public when they get here. So point taken, though. Sure. Blair, you've just put your hand up.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to flag that it is a delegated authority as well, Mr. Murphy, so any issues outside as well can be sorted out thereafter.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so are we okay to move on to the next item, and we'll come back to this?
Item 7, questions or matters relating to the work of the committee. I have none.
I'm not aware of any.
Item 8, any other business?
None that I'm aware of.
Item 9 is exclusion of the public. Are members content?
Thank you very much.